broadcasting over YouTube. Armand, if you hear me, can you just confirm that that's the case? Or
Yes, we're ready.
thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon. This is day 4 of our hybrid session. It's great. It has been great to see everyone in person who's here in New York, and it's great to see everyone on Zoom. It's been a really productive few days, and we have more work to do. We have a little bit of work to do next week, but I feel really positive about the momentum we're generating here on all 3 topics. Today, the purpose of today's session is Len will take the board through the changes made to address targeted issues raised by the board on Monday. You all should have or have received or posted the revised draft agenda item 2F. Just a reminder to you all that the final draft of ISO 600 is still going to be provided by noon tomorrow. Is that the day? And there's consultations with the task force that will take place on Sunday. Then any changes arising from the task force, from those consultation sessions, will be processed by the task force, and a final version of the standard should be sent to everyone by 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Monday, December 13th. That's what we're going to approve on Tuesday, the 14th. So, Len, the floor is yours to walk us through some of the changes. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone, for your input, helpful suggestions on Monday. So just before I start going through the changes, just a couple of things. So today we'll be focusing on the comments were raised during the session on Monday. So I'll walk you through in terms of what we have done and give you a reason for the changes, or maybe comments were not taken. That's one. Number 2 is what you'll see tomorrow will be including some of the offline comments received, or the task force have gone through them. We have meetings every day this week, and that, with some of the input we received today, will be reflected in the draft you will receive tomorrow. Now, of course, over the weekend, that Tom has already said, we set up consultation sessions. So to hear your comments and reaction on the draft, we'll provide to you tomorrow. Then on Monday, we'll send out a draft reflecting the discussion we'll have during the consultation, and that will be the document will be voted on. So with that, I'll go through the comments, and it will be very helpful in terms of when you raise your comments. We'd like to hear from you. Are there anything fatal that at this point that you want us to look at? But some of the editorial stuff, some of the nice to have comments, you just have to trust the task force. At our discretion, based on merits, we'll take them or not taking them, as you will see in tomorrow's draft. So raise those comments you think is really, really important. That'll be helpful because we don't have 90 minutes today for these sessions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through the changes in 4 batches. So we'll go through the requirements. So these are the comments we heard on Monday. Then we will go through some of the selected application material paragraphs to get your input. So with that, I'll quickly go through. I think I take it you have read it. So, but just for further clarify, in case when you read it, something won't clear to you. In paragraph 5, common system and control may exist, but not across the entire group. So we deleted across the group in paragraph 5. That's one change. In paragraph 9, comment that the wording is inconsistent with paragraph A15 because it does not mention component auditors. So we made no changes in paragraph 9 as the reference is from ISA 200, but we'll come back and explain. We made some changes in paragraph A15 so to make sure the meaning is the same. Next change will be paragraph 14C. Comment that the deletion at the request of make it less clear when the statutory auditor or auditor for a EMI becomes a component auditor. So we did not make any changes here, but just want to let you know that we actually made some changes in paragraph 821A. We'll discuss with you later. Paragraph 19B, suggestion to add access to at the beginning of the paragraph 19 little b. Also, there was a suggestion to delete reference to component management. So the task force had a lot of discussions on these two. So our conclusion is we're not making any changes to the current wording in 19B because that came straight from ISA 210, paragraph 6. So we just want to make sure we're aligned with ISA 210. And we also did not delete the reference to component management for the following reasons. The task force is of the view that this is an appropriate reference. It is special consideration. Also, you would remove the protection that should be afforded to the auditor if they do need to access information directly from the component management. For example, in a large group audit, component auditor will likely go to component management, and it's too burdensome to go to group management. Also, this was in the ED 600, and nobody raised that in a common process. So we just don't feel it's necessary to change at this late stage. Paragraph 26B, we actually made an error. We accidentally delete the word firm after a group auditor, so that should be added back. Okay, that was a mistake. And there's also a suggestion to change component auditor back to component auditor's firm. I think from Monday's discussion, there was some confusion in terms of component auditor and the use of term component auditor's firm. So we went back and looked at the glossary, and also the definition of component auditor. Auditor refers to the persons conducting the audit, or as applicable to the firm. So we did not make changes in this one. Also, I think Aaron also made a comment later in the application material. So well, I'll talk about it a little later, but we try to be consistent. We now using the term component audit firm in the standards. Next one will be 31B. There was a request for application material for 31B. So this is another one task force spent some time discuss. In the end, the task is of the view the application material is appropriate. Further application material is not really needed because this was already covered in application material paragraph A105. And also this is comments that we haven't received any written comments since the ED. Language was in the ED has never been raised. And we thought A105 adequately covered. Next one will be 32B. There's a request to have construct similar to paragraph 31A and use matters related to financial information of the component that the component auditor determined to be relevant. There was also a suggestion to delete the reference to related to financial information of the component that expression in paragraph 32B. So based on the suggestions in 32B, there were a number of comments in there. So we did add it, the language that was suggested, put forward to us during the plenary sessions. But we did not make changes given to other comments, provided the clarity on the matters that they may be communicated. So we took the suggestion, but the others we decided not to make changes, as you have seen in the turnaround draft. And lastly, for this first batch, I think there were comments asking for something to be added, to be helpful, to have some guidance regarding component performance materiality for an equity method investment. There were also questions about whether the wording in 35b should be lower than the amount regarded as clearly trivial to the group financial statement. So this is one the task force also spent a lot of time on. So we took on board that application material is likely needed for the equity method investment. So we added sentences to paragraph A117, which we'll go through again, regarding component performance materiality for the equity method investment. But we did not take changes suggested to 35B, as the shall not exceed wording was in ED 600, and was very supported by the commenters in the exposure process. Also, that wording in 35A and B has not really changed since March this year. So nobody raised any comments for the past 9 months or in all the board discussions. So we did not make changes to the clearly trivial lower than amount expression. So with that, I completed, at least walk you through in terms of the first batch of changes we made to the requirement section. And with that, maybe I'll pause here and ask Tom for board's input.
Thank you, Len. If you just grab your mic for a sec. Chun Wei.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Len, for the explanation. I'm really supportive of a lot of the changes that have been made here. So great job to the task force. Thanks for getting around so quickly. Just 2 quick comments. I think 26B, did you say that the auditor's firm that bid will be put back?
Yes, a group auditor firm. That firm was deleted by mistake.
Okay, okay, that's good. So I only have 1 comment, which 32A. I think you mentioned it, but I didn't quite hear the explanation. In the earlier session, I suggested that we remove related to the financial information of the component. And the reason is because I was thinking in the course of performing work for the group audit, the component auditor may come across issues that relate to, for example, the parent company or other components. So I wasn't sure why we're restricting the methods that we want them to communicate to those relating to financial information of the component. So it's still a question mark for me. So I wonder if you could help me understand why we decided not to remove this. Thanks.
Sue?
Thanks. Thank you, Len, and the task force for the responsiveness to some of the points we made. I know I raised a number of them in relation to the requirements and the responses in the application material. That's great, and I do think that some of those points really will assist in practice. I have 1 point in relation to 19B, because I sort of raised last time around the kind of discussions you can envisage having around engagement letters where you are asking group management to sign up to provide material from component management. I thought the explanation that you gave there around some of the structure and some of the exercise of their authority actually was really helpful. And I wonder whether there's conclusions or something to explain why it would be appropriate to keep that there. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. I see no other hands. Len, so back to you.
Yeah, Chen Wei, that question, I think there were a number of comments on 32A. I think when we consider other comments, I think from feel free, my task force and staff can come in, is when we talk about 32A, people thought the boundary has been pretty wide in terms of type of information. So if you look at 32A, the changes we made is the component auditors determined, in terms of from component audit perspective, they determine what needs to be communicated on a timely basis, and that's where the task force decided in terms of narrowing the boundary, because what a lot of comments talk about, you really had to align in terms of what needs to be communicated. Otherwise, it's pretty open-ended. So that put some boundary around it, but we did that reflecting all the comments we heard, and feel free to come in. My staff or task force member have other explanation to add.
Billy?
Thank you, Tom. John, the other reason why we looked at that is, remember, paragraph 31 and 32 work together in this area of the risk assessment procedures. And we felt it was appropriate in this instance to keep it, or keep the reference to matters related to the financial information as determined by the component auditor, because any other matters will in any case be picked up by paragraph 45J. And we felt that for that reason, it was appropriate to keep it here.
Okay. Any reaction? Len, I think it's back to you.
Okay, so then the second batch will be, next slide, please. We'll go through the changes from paragraph 37 to 59. So the first one will be in paragraph 38, little b. We split the paragraph 38B to have a bullet on responding to the assessed risk of material misstatement due to fraud in the consolidation, and a bullet on evaluating indicators of possible management bias that have been identified in the consolidation process. There was also an offline comment, have the bullet on responding to assessed risk of material misstatement due to fraud in the consolidation as the last bullet. So the task force try to be responsive. We split the 38B paragraph and made further changes to the bullet on management bias to align with the construct using ISA 540 revised to make sure we're consistent in terms of expression. Though then also respond to the comments and we'll move that bullet to be the last and second last bullets of the requirement. So that's the first thing we did in this section. Next one will be paragraph 41. There was an offline comments clarifying that this is a two-way communication as the communication to communication to communicating with. So based on the feedback, the task force changed the construct of the requirement from communication to communication with. That's one change we made. The next one will be in the two paragraphs 45 and 46. In paragraph 46A, we included a reference to the communication in paragraph 45. But in 45B, we did not. So what does it mean? Also, there's a comment about what does it mean by adequate in paragraph 46. So we also heard requests to clarify the paragraph 46 is done on a component by component basis. So those are the three comments we heard. So the changes we made, the first one we made was the reference to paragraph 45 was moved from 46B to 46A because the board members questioned which communication were being addressed. And the second error we made was this also highlight that significant matters often may be described in the communications requested in accordance with paragraph 45. So try to be clear what type of communications. We also deleted the word "the" in 46B to clarify that group auditors evaluation extend to all communications with the component auditor to this point in the group audit. And the task force also discussed that the requirements in paragraph 45 to 48, that batch of 4 paragraphs, are directly at the component auditor, and therefore it is implied that the requirements related to each component. However, the task force concluded that adding for each component to the intro wording in paragraph 45 would be helpful, including for circumstances in which the same component auditors may be doing audit work for more than one component. So the task force concluded that the wording was best placed in paragraph 45 as the starting point for the requirement in the intersection of the standards. The task force retained the word adequate, but there were some suggestions replacing the word adequate with the word sufficient. But I think when we're trying to, I think Josephine might have explained it in the Monday's plenary section, is what we mean adequate means implying the focus on a quantity of the work, where the sufficient is focused on the quality of the work. So we did not make changes to the word adequate. Right? The other way around. Sorry, the other way around. That's what I mean. So that's the changes in the 45, 46. Paragraph 59 little c clarified whether basis referred to both the group auditor's determination of component performance materiality and the clearly trivial threshold. And there was also some concern expressed that the documentation requirement goes beyond ISA 450. So what we did was in this section, we added a comment to indicate that the documentation requirement includes the basis of determination of components performance materiality and clearly trivial threshold amount. So that's when we made changes in 59C. So that pretty much conclude the turnaround we did for the requirement section. So I turn back to you, Tom, for comments.
Thank you, Len. You just turn your microphone off, please. Okay. Any comments? Julie.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Len. And my silence in the first batch wasn't, don't take that as a negative thing. That's a positive thing because I was happy with your changes. Just a couple things in this batch, Len, in 38. So I know I was one of the ones that raised the point in paragraph 38. So I just wanted to thank you and the task force for making that change. I think what's there now, while it looks like a big change, is much more clearly laid out, and the order is much better. So just wanted to support what you've done there in that paragraph. The change in 41, I think, is a little bit problematic because now we have a shall with respect to the component auditor, and we normally don't do that in the group audit standard. So I think the simplest solution is probably just to revert back to what we had originally. And then my only other one is on 45. And I think the addition of for each component isn't necessary there. I think that the group auditor would communicate to whomever the component auditors are what they need from a communication standpoint. And the way it reads right now, it could be misinterpreted kind of in the opposite direction as to what you described, which is every component auditor now thinks they have to communicate things about every component that's in the group audit. So I think the simplest solution again there is just to remove that revision that you made. That was it.
Anyone else? No other comments.
Okay, on 41, I think we already heard the comments on 41, so we're happy to revert back to the original wording, but just want to check if other board members are happy if we revert back to the old language we had in 41. If everybody's happy, we'll take Julie's comments.
See no objections. Choi.
Yeah, so I guess the question is if we remove, and I agree with Julie that in the group standard, we don't say component auditor shall do whatever. But I guess the original wording is slightly problematic because we say that group auditor communicate with component auditor matters that the group auditors or component auditor determined to be relevant. So how does that component auditor play into this sentence? I think that was the original confusion.
Yeah, I think one of the things I missed is we're going to keep the word about in there. So would address the concern you have. Yeah.
So maybe to read it out what we have right now, or at least what we discussed, I think, with the task force. So the sentence would now read, when the group auditor involves component auditors in the design or performance of further audit procedures, the group auditor shall communicate with component auditors about the matters that the group auditor or component auditor determines to be relevant. And then rest continues.
Okay with that?
Julie, on 45, suggestion to delete the changes we made in there for each component. What the task force is reflecting comments from other board members, but clearly you say your reason for taking it out, but we had some discussion earlier before this afternoon session, but be helpful at least hear from others in terms of whether they want to keep this suggested insert in there, or is it clear to the board member who raised this whether it's okay to leave it out?
Seems that's directed to me. I raised it. I'm okay pulling it out. Thanks, Len.
Thank you, Diane. No, I was trying to make sure, keep everybody happy, but Willie.
Yeah, and I do appreciate the point that Julie has made. So I was considering, but maybe the decision has been made already, whether the for each component might just be in the wrong place. So if you say the group auditor for each component shall request the component auditor, because I think that was Diane's point, that you need to make this determination for each component, but it's the group auditor that for each component determines. But if the decision is already made to take it out, that's fine.
I think so.
Thank you for this.
Len, I think it's back to you.
Next slide, please. So we're going to selected application material. So for this section, this batch, we'll go through the 6 of them on the slides. The first one will be A10A. There were offline comments about the need for some guidance on direction supervision review by the group auditor for an audit of component financial information that has been completed. So what we did was we added paragraph 10A to link to the paragraph 30B in ISA 220. That approach to DSR, direction supervision review, is responsive to the circumstances of the engagement. Also, the task force discussed the direction supervision, in particular, can be accomplished in various ways, and the guidance in paragraph A73 may be used for when the audits of component financial statement has already been completed. So, responding to comments to add application material to explain that. Next one to go through is A15 to A17. There were some suggestions about inconsistency in wording between paragraph 9 and A15. I touched on paragraph 9 earlier, so we'll address what we did in A15. There's also comments about additional clarity needed in the last bullet of A16, as it implied that professional skepticism didn't need to be applied when there are tight reporting deadlines. There was also a question whether the reference to inconsistent in paragraph A17 should be contradictory. So in this area, the changes made was we delete the reference to component auditor in the first sentence to A15 to be consistent with paragraph 9, which was explained earlier when we go through the paragraph 9 turnaround document. So no further revision to the first sentence. Is it paraphrasing ISO 200 requirement mentioned in paragraph 9? The task force also discussed whether the first sentence of A15 could be deleted, but noted that that sentence has been reviewed and very supported by the professional skepticism working group. So we decided not to make those changes, not to be deleted. We retain reference to component auditors in the second sentence of A15, as the group auditor's DSR, direction supervision review, extends to the entire engagement team, including component auditors. We also revised the wording of the last bullet of A16 to put a positive spin on it. And we revised paragraph 17 as the exercise of professional skepticism always include being alert for inconsistent information. So we kept inconsistent versus contradictory to align with ISA 500, paragraph 11. In paragraph A21A, there was a suggestion to include application material to address concern about removing the phrase "at the request of the group auditor" in paragraph 14 little c. As with the deletion, it is less clear when the auditor at the component level becomes a component auditor, particularly when an audit of financial statements of an entity or business unit is completed before the group auditor decides to use that work. So based on the suggestion, we added application material with the link to paragraph 24 and application material A55. So if the audit work has been performed that the group auditor uses for the purpose of the group audit, then the statutory auditor or auditor of the EMI is a component auditor. So by default, they are not a component auditor if they are unable to or unwilling to cooperate with the group auditor or perform the audit work requested by the group auditor. So paragraph A55 provides guidance on that the group auditor needs to do in those situations. So the task force also noted that in these circumstances can be further explained in the implementation supporting materials. And lastly, for this section, I think the change we made is paragraph A40. So comment came in that noted that the second bullet of paragraph 840 seems to be asking the group auditor to make a judgment of whether the accounting for the entity investment is correct, which is an accounting standards issue and should not be raised in ISA 600. So the task force went back and considered our comment. And so we came back with a suggestion, enhance the bullet by focusing it more on the auditing implication instead of the accounting. So the task force was of the view that not having access to the equity method investment may be inconsistent with the group management's assertions regarding the appropriateness of the use of the equity basis of accounting. The task force was also of the view that this point did not really fit in the bullet listing 840. So we made a separate paragraph 839 to make that point. So with that, gone through the first batch of the selected application materials, and Tom, happy to take comments from the board members.
Okay. I don't know if you could just turn your mic off for a sec. Any comments? Julie?
My comment is just to say, I know I was one of the ones that raised the issue on A39 and A40, and I'm really happy with the way it is now. Thank you.
Roger?
Again, responsiveness on A39A and A40, very much appreciated. I think it's much improved. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Chun-Wei?
So I think A39A is a vast improvement. I like it a lot. I do have two sort of lingering questions. Number one is, we talk about the group having non-controlling interests, and then we say the group auditor's access is restricted. And I wonder if it should be the group's access to the information or people entity rather than the group auditor. And the second question is, I guess having significant influence gives you the power to participate in, I think it says accounting and operating policy decisions. And I wonder if that, and I guess in practice, it doesn't really mean that it is unrestricted access, because it's not a control, which is why we have all this issue that are surfacing in practice. And I'm just wondering whether that could be reflected in terms of, instead of saying consider whether such restrictions are inconsistent, we say consider whether the degree of restrictions or the level of restriction are inconsistent. Because otherwise, I'm just slightly worried that reading this, the takeaway is that as long as there's a restriction, then the equity method is inappropriate. Yeah, I'm not sure whether I'm making sense, but it's just a lingering concern. Thanks.
Okay, Sashika?
Thank you. I just want to say that I was the, one of the person who commented on A40 second bullet, and I support the task force's wording. Thank you very much for responsiveness to the comment we raised. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sashika. Okay, so everyone's in support. You have a question from Chun-Wei.
Well, so maybe.
Sorry, Diane, I didn't see your card. It was blocked by the tissue box.
Sorry about that. I only had one small comment on A10A, and it's the tail end of the paragraph where we make reference to the fact that the group auditor may use the work of a component auditor in their statutory audit if that work has been completed. And I just question the word completed, because even if that statutory audit is in process and not completed, I think you would be able to leverage that information as well. So my only issue is just a question, does it really need to be completed? So if you could just take a peek at that. Otherwise, I do want to thank you for being very responsive to the comments.
Sue, you want to come in?
Yeah, if I can just come back on what Diane just said, I appreciate what you said. I think previously the concern that I and I think a couple of others had raised was more that there appeared to be an exclusion for financial statements that had already been signed off. So that was I think the particular concern that this was addressing. I mean, if there's fine tuning of the words, that's fine. But I think that statement about completed was actually quite important.
I appreciate that. I'm just questioning, can it be completed and in process? You know, could we be a bit more inclusive unless we feel differently?
Okay, Dan. I mean, were you looking to come in? Yep. Okay.
The only thing I would say, Diane, about that is A10 already gives the flexibility for either in process or completed. The question that was raised was whether some guidance could be provided about direction supervision in particular for when an audit had been completed. And that's why the focus in A10A was on completed.
Thank you, Dan. Len?
So Chen Wei, your suggestion on A40, the expression, I guess you said degree of restriction or level of restriction. I had a quick word with the staff. I think the task force just have to go back and see, you know, your suggestion and have a discussion. And we have a task force meeting before the turnaround, before the documents will be issued tomorrow. So we'll take that into consideration.
Okay, I think. Eda?
Maybe Len, if you allow me, I'd happy to speak to it. So it's not the when we say whether such restrictions are inconsistent, it doesn't mean by default they are inconsistent. You need to consider it, and in that you will assess the degree of inconsistency. So personally, I don't think it's necessary because it covers it.
Joey?
Thanks, Edo. And I must confess, I just spent quite a bit of time reading this, and I did have that interpretation as well, because if you assess it, you'll be assessing the degree to which it is inconsistent. But I'm just wondering whether other people will take that same interpretation, and if adding the degree to which or the level of will actually make it clearer. So I did read it that way, but I was wondering whether it might actually cause some misinterpretation in practice, and whether a slight change will actually make it clearer. Thanks.
Okay. Fernando?
Thanks, Tom. I'm fine that when it is presented here in A39A and was also doing the translation, I don't believe people will misinterpret what it's provided here.
Thank you. Len, back to you.
Yeah, again, we'll take it back to the task force for their view. My apology, I actually didn't cover A64, so I'll do this A64 with the remaining changes we have in application material. A64, so with respect to the last sentence of A64, in the offline comments was noted that the last sentence would be made more consistent with paragraph A140 by including the example. Also in the last sentence, it was also suggested to change may obtain to may need to attain, given that the underlying obligation in ISA 220 revised. Based on the helpful comments, so the task force updated the last sentence in paragraph A64 to reflect the offline comments. Next slide, please. Next slide would basically just the remaining application material paragraphs. A69 to A74, those questions about what the word those was referring to in the first bullet of A73. So what we did was we clarified the first bullet of A73 to refer to communications. In A74, there were concerns about A74 reads like a separate incremental requirement versus something that is done throughout the course of the group audit. Also a concern that A74 extends to, for example, all significant judgments made at the component level versus those that are relevant to the group audit. Regarding the significant judgment in second bullet of A74, suggestions to provide a more direct reference to paragraph A92 of ISA 220 in the footnote. So what we did was we revised the intro wording of A74 to put in the context of applying ISA 220 to group audits and clarify that the documentation to the reviewed related to significant matters or significant judgments that are relevant to the group audit. We added hanging paragraph to indicate that the review by the group engagement partner often takes place during the course of the group audit. Then lastly, the task force discussed and decided that a more direct footnote reference to paragraph 892 of ISA 220 was not needed in the second bullet of A74. It is already mentioned in footnote 67. Next change is A108. It was noted that the paragraph seemed to be a bit circular, that with the deletion of the first sentence, the application material was lost, the context of scoping in ISA 315, paragraph 31. So there was a revision suggestion to mirror the wording using ISA 315, paragraph 31. That's the changes we made. A117, we mentioned earlier when we talk about the requirement, paragraph 35, there was a comment that it would be helpful to have some guidance regarding component performance materiality for the equity method investment. There was a lot of discussion in the task force. So the task force did acknowledge that in practice, when determining components materiality for the equity method as investee, the group auditor may factor in the group share of the investment in the equity method investee. So we added the last sentence of A117 for those situations. A114 to A146, the comments came in not sure what the statement is needed in A144, as it sounds like a report versus an overall summary of findings and conclusions. There was also offline comments that in some jurisdiction, local law and regulation may specify the forms of report to be provided by the component auditor. And also comment regarding reference to component auditor firm in A146 is only referenced in the standards and is not defined. So the changes made in paragraph A144 to A146, what we did was we delete the word statement in paragraph A144. We added a sentence to A144 to acknowledge local laws and regulations. And the task force added A114A in response to the offline board comments that some guidance would be useful about the implication for the group audit if the group auditor determined that the communication with the component auditors are not adequate for the group auditor's purposes. So some minor edits in A145 to streamline the wording, and also remove the reference, the firm in A146. And lastly, changes made in paragraph A169 to A175. Those are offline comments that a reference to professional skepticism would be helpful in A171. So what we did was we added wording to the fourth bullet of A171 to address the comments on professional skepticism. Comments came in, there was concern about the deletion of the first sentence of A173, as it was setting up a clear expectation the replication in the group auditor's file. So which was then followed by an acknowledgement that the group auditor may decide to summarize or replicate or retain certain copies of component audit documentations with examples. Also, there's a board offline suggestion to include practical examples in A173, retaining copies of component audit documentations to facilitate review by the group engagement partners or EQR, engagement quality reviewer, for the group audit. So in A173, what we did was we restated the first sentence in A173. And the task force also discussed whether to include the examples retaining copies to facilitate review of the group engagement partner and the engagement quality reviewer. The task force noted that similar wording had been included in the previous draft of the standard, and so the decision by the task force was to not make any changes. So with that, Tom, I've gone through all the changes in the paragraph listed on the slides, and happy to take comments.
Wendy.
Thank you, Tom. First, I want to say to Len and the task force, great job on responding to the comments and also some of the explanations. I also want to say that I support the deletion in 45 in the intro where we added in each component. And then lastly, I'm wondering if you can explain in A71 a little further on the change in the third bullet. Because this is about documentation, right? And I'm not sure what that documentation would look like. And maybe it's related to professional judgment, not necessarily professional skepticism. Thank you.
Sue?
Thanks. I've consistently raised the point about performance materiality in equity method investments, and I just wanted to thank the task force for considering that matter. The addition that's there, I think, is really helpful. Thanks.
Roger?
Thanks to the task force on the reinstatement of the first sentence in A173. I think that's a much clearer statement of expectation. So appreciate that, supportive.
Diane?
I've got the same comment as Wendy, which, and as Len, as you explained this, I wasn't sure if the question that was being raised is how does the group auditor demonstrate professional skepticism in reviewing the documentation? And so I wasn't sure, first of all, why we anchored to the fourth bullet versus does it apply to that whole section? And if the genesis of the question is, how did that group auditor exercise skepticism in reviewing it? It might be a little tweak on the word. So I think we just might need a little clarification as to what we were trying to accomplish. Thank you.
John Way?
Thanks, Tom. On the same bullet, but I didn't have the same concern, I guess, that Diane and Wendy raised. But my concern is slightly different, and it sounds minor, but it's the use of the word challenging. And I raised the same point in another application material, which is A89 in the first batch, but I know A89 is not in the turnaround document. I'm just questioning, when will exercise of professional skepticism be challenging? It sounds almost like you're not allowed to exercise professional skepticism or something like that. So the original wording in A89 was particularly important, which I thought made sense. So maybe I just want to understand the change in the wording and why particularly important was wrong and challenging is the right word to use.
Josephine?
I just wanted to respond to A171 and the additional wording in there. And the question about the auditor's documentation of direction supervision. So in ISA 2, this was actually an offline comment from the FRC, so I feel I have to stand up for it. So the ISA 220 requires that, doesn't require, but has lots of application material that addresses the auditor's consideration of impediments to professional skepticism and mitigations to those impediments, one of which, of course, is modifying your direction, supervision, and review. So it's a valid area when you're determining how to modify your direction, supervision, and review, and it's part of that thought process. So we thought that it would be quite a good place to put it as a reminder that where there are areas of professional skepticism that might be challenging, and I'm not addressing Chun Wee's point here, then this is certainly something that you might want to think about when you're thinking about the rationale. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. Julie?
Thanks, Josephine, for that, because I had the same question on A171. So I hear you, and I get that you want to consider professional skepticism, particularly when you're thinking about your direction, supervision, and review. But I do find this one a little bit challenging where it sits in the sort of documentation piece. And I wonder if the words, at least as written, could imply that there are degrees of professional skepticism and someone has to contemplate that. Like, I think professional skepticism applies across the board. So I don't know if there's a way to reword it. Sorry, I don't have a solution off the top of my head, but that one troubled me a little bit. And I will just actually support, Len, what Sue said around the equity method component performance materiality add. I think that's a really great add. It's a really practical situation that comes up. And so I think having a nod to it in the standard is really helpful.
Okay. Len, back to you.
Yeah, AA171. Thank you, Josephine, for that explanation. But I see, the 3 board member raised comments. So I was just wondering, would be helpful to have such suggestions if you could, because I think at this juncture, I think it would be helpful to have suggestion for the task force to consider. I mean, you don't have to do it now, but before tomorrow, it'll be good.
Okay. So a little homework for people who have a suggestion on that paragraph, A1 to 71. And I think the task force consider it. Like, Josephine, is it really, you mentioned it's something that you raised in your offline comments, but I guess it's very specific. Is it really necessary in this paragraph?
It actually came from the inspection team as an area where there could be more focus. So I stand by it being a good addition to the application material. If we can find better wording that will help board members, then I think we should give it a go.
I assume this Chun Wei.
Yeah, I just want to put on the record that I actually support the inclusion. I thought it's a helpful steer to the practitioner.
Okay. We'll give a think on that, but it doesn't seem to me like this is an issue that the standard will fall down on if we can't find a better issue. I think a bit of wording. let me let the task force ruminate on that. If people have suggestions that includes that thought, but maybe not under the current articulation, certainly get it, by all means, get it to the task force quickly, and then maybe brought back to you. Okay, Len?
If there are no other comments, we'll take back what we heard today and process them, and we will also include some of the changes we made from the offline comments that we did not hear in on Monday's plenary sessions. So you will see them tomorrow. I forgot the time. Tomorrow, 3 o'clock, or by lunchtime tomorrow. By noon. The task force is meeting early in the morning tomorrow. Yes, and we'll get to you by email. And so I know some of you are flying home, so you should get it with a joint transit or on the way back, or you're right to your destination. So then happy. If you haven't scheduled a session with us on Sunday, please go ahead. The staff and I and a couple other task force members will be participating in those consultations with you. So with that, I'll turn back to you, Tom.
Just want to remind people that the consultation sessions are not mandatory. They're only if you need it. And based upon the discussion today, I could see that it may not be needed for most people here because people seem pretty comfortable with where the language of the standard is rested. So it's not a sense of obligation, though I am certain on a Sunday afternoon that it's nothing more than Len would want to do than sit down with you on a Zoom call. So so again, that's very good. I just wanted, as we start to conclude this topic for today, ask if anyone wants to make any general comments on the standard or where we stand. Janine or Jim, would you like any observations you'd like to add from the PIOB or CAG perspective?
Yes.
Janine?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah, I listened to the comments. I also saw them through the email, and yeah, I think from a PIOB perspective, we think this is a very important standard. And many audits are group audits. For us, as we also the last year have published in the as public interest issues, we think that those are covered in the standard. So we're supportive of this standard. And yeah, a lot of work has been done, and it's now the final phase, I think. I personally, I think the challenge will be, or the proof of the pudding is in the eating when it comes to the level of there are two challenges, I think, and that is the documentation that will be reviewed by the group auditor in the end on the component audit work, and the documentation. That's also those are points that also were raised by throughout the project by MG member organizations, and but that's it's addressed in the standards. So we have to wait and see what the performance will be in practice, because in the end we set these standards to change or revise the standards to also change behaviors, and I hope that will be successful by this standard. So thanks.
Thanks, Janine. Jim?
Thanks, Tom. And I think The board has covered substantially all the issues that have been brought up by CAG. And you've been very thoughtful in the discussion today and the final revisions. So I think we're satisfied.
Thank you, Janine and Jim. So when we come to the vote on Tuesday, provided we haven't made substantial changes, we'll have your comments for the record. I may not ask you to repeat them, but of course you'll be offered an opportunity if you'd like. Okay, so we got it to the end of group audits for today. And I think the task force should rest with some confidence that we're in a really good shape for approval. I think we may be even able to beat the timetable, not use all the allocated time for approval next week, but we will still plan on convening at 3 p.m. Eastern time next Tuesday, because that is what we've scheduled, and there are observers, I'm sure, who've marked it on their calendar because they love to watch us on YouTube. So thank you for watching us on YouTube. Before we close today, I think it's worth saying, and I want to do it here because we're in person. Sadly, the two people that I'm going to talk about in person are not here. You know that we miss you and we wish you were here. And so thank you. But I want to put on the record our enormous appreciation and for the contributions and achievements of our two outgoing members, Imran Vanker and Roger Simon. Let me talk about Imran first. Imran, I noticed you dressed for the occasion. I feel like I should throw my tie on now too, but please forgive me. But Imran has been an IAASB member from 2016 to 2021. I've personally had the opportunity to work closely with Imran in his capacity as a planning committee member, chair of the ISQM2 task force. And I'd say over our enormous amount of regular catch-ups, whether it be by Zoom, in person for a little bit, or by text. And I've always appreciated Imran's willingness to raise the challenging questions and in many ways being a conscience of the board. So thank you, Imran, for that. Just to be clear about all of that Imran's done for the board, and we know you can always hear from Imran his passion for improving audit quality. And therefore, it's been no surprise for all of his legacy as it relates to the quality management standards from its earliest stages. All the way from the start of his time on the board in 2016, he was assigned to one of the quality control working groups that was considering the feedback from respondents, the invitation and comment, and developing the project proposals. Subsequently, he was assigned to the quality control task force, which was responsible for the development of the EDs at both ISQM1 and 2. When a new task force was needed to focus on the development of the new engagement quality review standard, Imran was asked to chair the ISQM2 task force. He saw that through successful development of the new standard through its final approval in September 2020. After completing ISQM2 in 2020, Imran was assigned to the fraud working group as they embarked on information gathering in pursuit of a new project on fraud. He has been a tireless and strong advocate for coordination with other standard setting boards, in particular our work with IAASB. He was our liaison member with IAASB and contributed to the efforts to really develop what I think is a very strong partnership that exists between the two boards today. Imran has been, as I mentioned earlier, a member of the steering committee, now the planning committee for the last 4 years. We all owe Imran a debt of gratitude for his contributions to the IAASB, and we will miss you, Imran. Let me turn to Roger. Roger has been a member of the board for a slightly shorter period, 2019 to 2021, but his time supporting the board, being involved with the board extends well beyond that, because Roger was also a member of the board from 2002 to 2005. Although his term ended in 2005, he remained deeply involved in all of our workings, in particular on our non-audit standards. Roger co-chaired the project to develop ISA 3410 for assurance on greenhouse gas statements from 2007 to 2012. He was also a task force member on the project to revise ISA 3000 from 2011 to 2013. In his recent term, he continued his involvement in our non-audit standards, being a correspondent member of the EER task force. He was also a member of the agreed upon procedures task force. To some extent, we're coming full circle on that, Roger, and you've put us in a really strong foundation due to your contributions to take on all that we need to do and we've committed to do from the sustainability and ESG reporting and assurance standpoint going forward. But what we probably from this term will be reminded of more than anything else is your passion and commitment to the audits of less complex entities. Roger was truly instrumental in moving the project forward toward the development of a separate standard for audits of LCEs. Under your leadership, the LCE working group established a discussion paper to understand the needs of audits for less complex entities and explore possible solutions to address those needs. Following the developments to address the LCE developments to address what we heard from the discussion paper, you helped us critically in helping us chair the working group responsible for the IAASB's drafted principles and guidelines. And you also were a key member of the task force, LCE task force, as a correspondent member as we worked to the ED's release last year. Let me just say that, Roger, your contribution to the IAASB's work, and in truth, the field of assurance goes well beyond your term here. You should be proud of your legacy. We're proud to have you as a member of our board, and we hope you have a great retirement, but we know we could call upon you because we're dealing with topics that you're passionate about. So thank you, Roger. Okay, we're gonna close. I wanted that for the record. One last thing I'd have to say, and I mentioned this at the outset, I don't think she's in the room, but one of our long-serving TAs, Denise Weber, is ended her term as a TA. So I'm sure she will be around our work quite a bit, but huge thanks to Denise for all that she's done to support the work of the IAASB. And I would say right now, I should say thank you to all the TAs for all their service to the board, because we would not be able to do the work that we do without you. So I'm going to close the public session right now. We'll move to executive session afterwards, but thank you for all those that are following us on the broadcast, and we'll take, what do you say, a 5-minute break? We'll reconvene at 3:20 in executive session, 3:20 Eastern time. Thank you.